Welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight, 7 true Pacific Northwest horror stories, cedar, moss, and relentless rain. Before we start, like and subscribe and comment where you're from and what time you're watching so YouTube keeps showing you stories like this. Windows misting, rain drumming. Ready? Let's begin. I turned off the highway just after sunrise and followed a narrow forest road toward Quill Lake. The radio was off. My coffee had gone lukewarm, and the trees along the shoulder stood so still. It felt like they were listening. I'm 36 now. I've been shooting landscapes for a living since I was 24, and I know the Cascade trails well enough to walk some sections from memory. Saturday, October 12th, 2024. I wanted a clean set of frames before the first snow drifted down. If I was lucky, I'd catch that thin smoke of morning. Haze on the water and sell a print or two before the holidays. Only 3 cars sat crooked in the gravel pullout when I rolled in a little after 7. Good, fewer. Hikers meant fewer ripples on the lake. I did the usual ritual. Check batteries, wipe glass, count cards, tug each zipper. My bag carried the essentials. Body and primes, a mid-zoom. The light carbon tripod that always feels like cheating. An orange whistle my sister Leah insists I carry for bears and weird men. 2 bottles of water. And a couple of protein bars that taste like sweet cardboard. The first stretch of trail settled me. The ground was tracked with deer slots and last week's boot treads. Loose needles cushioned my steps. Jays heckled me from someplace I couldn't see. The mountain air had that nose-sting crisp that means you should have packed a thicker hat. All normal. I walked on. About 1.5 miles in, I reached an old windfall I use as a landmark. Bleached trunk, ribs of root still clawing the slope, and noticed shaved bands on several firs nearby. Not claw rakes, not random gouges from a snowplow or skidding log. The bark had been stripped off in long, smooth ribbons, as if someone had planed each strip with care. The cuts rode high, 8 feet up or more, and sap glowed amber in the slices like fresh varnish. I did what I always do, made pictures. On playback, the stripped bands blew out in a way that shouldn't have happened. The rest of the frame was properly exposed. Only those pale rings flared as if light leaked from the trees themselves. I bracketed, shifted angle, shaded the trunks with my body. Same result. I told myself resin reflects weird, shrugged, and kept moving. Quill Lake revealed itself all at once, a long oval of dark water rimmed with spruce and hemlock. Usually on a cold morning like this, there's a thin veil drifting above the surface. No veil today, just a sheet of black glass that mirrored clouds and tree line like polished obsidian. I don't know why that absence bothered me, but it did. I stepped onto a rock lip that juts 10 feet into the water and set up. Through the viewfinder, across the lake at the shadowed edge of trees, a thin, upright shape stood among the trunks. It didn't sway or shift, it simply occupied the space. I lowered the camera and looked with both eyes. Nothing there, only verticals of bark and the tangle of understory. I framed again. The shape returned, exactly where I'd first seen it. My head went hot in that dull, not quite panic way that comes before you admit something is off. While I changed from a 35 to a 70, the temperature dropped hard. Frost chewed white at the tripod collars. My breath hung in front of me. You get cold spikes in October, sure, but this felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. I tried to check the weather app. My phone shivered into static lines like an old tube TV, and then froze. The battery icon was fine. The screen was not. Sound came next. Not a plane. Not a boat. A low tone rose from the far end of the lake, steady and deep enough to buzz in my teeth. If you've ever stood near a big pipe organ when someone leans into a single note, it was like that. No melody, just a pressure of sound. My body didn't ask my opinion. It decided to leave. I grabbed the tripod to collapse it, twisted the locks, and the legs refused to slide. The metal felt like dry ice through my gloves, so cold I could have sworn it smoked. Fine, I could buy another tripod. I freed the head, swung the strap over my shoulder, and started back toward the trail. The note didn't get louder. It thickened, like another voice lay under it, then another, until I could feel 3 or 4 tones beating lightly against each other. As I walked, the shaved rings on the trunks ahead of me had picked up a pale blue cast, a pulse just strong enough to catch the corner of my eye. The pulse kept time with the note. The trail itself felt narrower, trees leaning in a degree they hadn't before. Something moved to my left, exactly at the edge of peripheral vision, keeping pace, never quite crossing the line where my eyes could grab it. Each time I turned, I got the afterimage of brush settling, nothing more. I kept my face forward and lengthened my stride. A fork appeared that doesn't exist on any map I've ever used. A path rising toward a ridge on the left and a shallow fall into a yellowed fog on the right. My phone tried to show me where I stood and ended on a spin of the location dot, like a coin that would not fall. Behind me, the forest gave me a clear, wet drag with each heavy step, like a long rope wound around a log. I went high. The ridge path pinched tight. The note gained grit, like a choir throat singing underwater. Dark sap streaks had bled down the bark in narrow curtains. Overhead, bent limbs from one side met their twins from the other and made low arches that forced me to duck. Every time I slid under, a flick of cold touched the back of my neck, sharp as a fingertip. I ran then. The kind of run you do on a slope when you want to stay controlled, but your heels keep skidding, and the ground can't seem to decide if it's dirt or grease. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The trail behind me had softened like a lake when wind dies. My tracks blurred at the edges and then settled into smooth ground, as if an invisible sleeve passed over them. I didn't check again. The ridge ended in a cut so sudden I had to sit down hard to keep from tumbling over. I slid my boots until my toes peered into a drop. I couldn't see the bottom. Only darkness layered with fern tips and the stumps of old snags sticking up like broken teeth. Trees caged me on both sides. Their branches laced into each other as tight as fingers interlocked. The nearest trunks wore clean circles of shaved wood all the way around, the pale bare bands bright as bone. Staring at one of those circles made my eyes water, like I'd looked at a welding arc for a second too long. The drag and the step landed a breath behind me. Smell came with it. Ozone and scorched plastic braided with lake rot. The note below me pulled at my stomach. I raised the camera the way you lift a shield. It stood between two trunks, a head taller than the lower branches, 12 feet, maybe more. The proportions were wrong in polite, quiet ways that shouted at my nerves. Shoulders too narrow for the length of arm, elbows where they shouldn't be. The head leaned to one side at a frank, tired angle, as if the neck had decided long ago that straight was a waste of effort. Instead of features, the face was a smooth, pale plane crossed by one vertical slit that flexed open and shut, like it was learning the concept of air. I pressed the shutter. The flash fired even though I do not use flash outdoors and I disabled it in the menu months ago. The creature flinched, recoiling with a sound I still don't have a clean word for. Steam forced through canvas with a winded scream backwards underneath. Shapes gathered behind it. Not one, not five. Dozens sliding into view between the trunks. Every one tall, every one bent or stretched in its own private way, all with that blank pale front and that single seam. The note thickened enough to buzz the fillings in my molars. The ground near my boots gave way in a sluice of pebbles. The tall one began to move toward me. Its legs made walking gestures, but the body glided at a speed the steps didn't justify, like a dubbed video out of sync. I fired again. The camera gave a thin whine I've never heard from it in any weather. The battery icon dropped as if it fell down a shaft, full to half to red. Something wrapped my right ankle from the darkness below the cut. Cold, living, strong. Not a hand, not a rope. Something in between. I hit the ground hard. The strap snapped tight and the camera bounced to the lip and jittered there. I rolled and looked down. The drop wasn't empty. It writhed. Pale cables, tissue not fiber, twisted together and reached upward like vines pulled in a slow tide. I couldn't see where they began. The tall figure's long arms reached toward my face. The jointing bent into angles that hurt to track. The seam on its face widened and narrowed, widened and narrowed. I don't think it was breathing. I think it was listening. I clamped both hands on the camera and pinned the shutter. The strobe of light went frantic. With each burst, the trunks owned a few more tall shapes that hadn't been there the moment before, each one rocking in place to the heavy beat of the tone like tall weeds in a current. The camera got hot through my gloves. Smoke leaked from the grip. A bright crack sounded from the battery door and white sparks spit toward my jacket. My body threw the camera away on reflex. It skittered, tipped off the ledge, and slid from sight. Everything stopped. The tone didn't trail. It cut. The tall thing hung mid-reach, a painting of itself. The cold band cinched my ankle and held, but did not pull. The air pressed down on me as if a heavy book had been laid over my chest. Far below, my camera gave the softest, silliest noise a camera can make. Beep, beep, beep. Then a weak flash blinked up from the dark where it had fallen. Every tall head, if heads is what they are, turned toward that blink. Then, as if answering a call, the shapes flowed toward the light, the nearest slithering over the lip and down into the tangle with that boneless, wrong smoothness. The pressure on my ankle loosened. The thing holding me let go as if someone had tapped a conductor's stand and dismissed it. I scrambled backward on my elbows, stood, and took the only open corridor that looked like a path. The forest reset in 3 strides. The arches vanished. The shaved circles faded to plain bark. The air warmed from freezer to refrigerator. Behind me, down in the cut, the timer beeped and flashed, and with each flash the tone tried to wake and failed. The trail returned to the sequence my legs knew. Snag on the left. Hollow stump on the right. The small rise where the windfall makes a step. I didn't look back again. I didn't stop. When the parking lot shone through the trees, my heart did a weird hiccup that almost sent me to my knees. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, wrapped my palms in the spare shirt from the back seat, and drove until a gas station's buzzing lights felt like company. I told Leah I'd scorched my hands on a failing battery and might need a clinic. I did not say anything about tall things or slits or notes that lived in your ribs. The burns knitted into thin white lattices across both palms, little hieroglyphs of skin. If I hold them up to a window and squint, they almost make patterns. I didn't file a report about the tripod. I didn't hike back to look for the camera. I told myself to be grateful I still had hands. 11 days later, a ranger called from the district office to ask if I'd been up near Quill. We found a carbon tripod planted on a rock shelf and a camera a few yards away, he said. Serial numbers match your online registration. The gear's in absurdly good shape for what it looks like it's been through. He offered to email a sample from the card before I came in. I said yes. The message hit my inbox while we were still talking. I opened it. The image showed my back framed dead center, walking away from Quill Lake with my pack on. The surface behind me was black as polished stone. Between the trees on the opposite bank stood rows of tall, narrow silhouettes, all facing the camera, all clearer than any wildlife shot I've ever made. The timestamp said 11:39 a.m., hours after I'd been halfway to town. You want us to hold the gear? The ranger asked. Card's odd. One image in a folder all by itself. The rest looks normal. Your early frames of driftwood, that sort of thing. Please keep it, I said, or dispose of it. Your call. I hung up, deleted the image, emptied the trash, and shut the lid like the laptop could leak light. That night, I woke around 3:08 to a soft click from the kitchen. Old house's click. Hot water pipes contract. The refrigerator cycles. I lay still, translating sounds into harmless explanations, and felt the skin on my palms buzz like an old battery waking. 2 mornings after that, a blocked number. The voice said he logged evidence for the ranger's office. Quick oddity, he said. The camera's XCF model string isn't a model. It's just repeating marks, /dot in a pattern. The GPS field doesn't make sense either. It's not coordinates, just the same marks offset. Ever seen that? No, I said, and said I had to go. I taped brown paper over the mirrors and shut the blinds. I put the camera bag in a plastic bin and shoved it into the back of the closet. When I came back from a grocery run, the paper from the hallway mirror lay folded into neat squares on the table, and the tape curled into a single spiral like a shed snakeskin. I left town the next morning and drove back roads for no reason, except that barns and fence lines make honest shapes. By evening, I could breathe again. When I unlocked my front door, Leah's whistle, which lives clipped inside my pack, sat centered on the kitchen table like a coin in a museum case. I started sleeping on the couch with the lamp on. It helped until it didn't. 3:11 a.m. woke me 3 nights in a row. The minute itself felt like a tapped glass at a dinner party. On the 4th night, my phone buzzed with a new message from no one at all. Blank sender, blank subject, one attachment. I shouldn't have opened it. I did. The photo showed my living room at 3:11 that morning, taken from the hallway. I lay on the couch with an arm flung over my eyes. The lamp burned low. On the wall above my head, the shadows of my hands were thrown high and bright, and in those shadows the faint lattice scars blazed. Thin white grids woven into my palms, lighting the wall like someone had drawn with a match and never put it out. I forwarded the image to no one. I deleted it. I turned the lamp off and stared at the dark. Somewhere far off, a block away, a mile, up in the timberline where Quill sits, the air picked up the slightest, lowest thread of a note I knew in my bones. I went to the closet, hauled out the plastic bin, and dug to the bottom until I found the old point and shoot I keep for teaching workshops. Its battery held a little charge. It has a tiny pop-up flash that fires whether you like it or not. I set it on the coffee table, pointed at the ceiling, selected the 2-second timer and pressed the shutter. Beep, beep, the flash blinked. For 2 heartbeats, the room felt wrong, thick, waiting. And then the pressure slid off me like a coat. I left the little camera there, set to auto timer, ticking every few minutes, lighting my ceiling in weak bursts until the battery died at dawn. When the sun finally put silver on the edges of everything, I stood up, flexed my hands, and watched the faint white lines on my palms fade back to the color of skin. By lunch, I had purchased 4 battery-powered strobes and 3 timers online. I don't know if they will be enough. I don't know what counts as enough. I do know 2 things. First, if I ever hear that held note again, I will start the light before I look for the door. Second, when the ranger's office calls to ask, politely, professionally, whether I plan to collect my tripod and camera, I will say, please keep them, and add, if it were up to me, I'd leave them exactly where you found them, aimed at the trees. I didn't plan to spend the night out there. I went in for 3 hours, walked the loop, flagged the blowdowns, checked the footbridges after the storm. That was the whole job. The Kettle River Valley was quiet after a week of rain, all fir and cedar, and that wet, dark smell that hangs low when the clouds sit on the ridges. I parked at the spur lot off Forest Road 621 in the late afternoon, thinking I'd be back at the motel before the diner closed. I was 33 that fall, working freelance trail maintenance after leaving a guiding outfit in Wenatchee. My radio was clipped to my shoulder strap. My pack carried flagging tape, a folding saw, a first aid pouch, a spare headlamp, and 2 liters of water. I had a habit of saying the checklist out loud while I tightened my laces. It kept the nerves clean. Radio, tape, saw, kit, light, water. I said it once, locked the truck, and started up the old CCC path toward Alder Draw. For the first mile, it was the kind of quiet you pay for on postcards, water dripping from sword ferns, a raven's 2-syllable croak, wind moving somewhere you couldn't see. I marked a leaning hemlock, cut a few alder whips, and kicked duff off the stone steps. It felt good to be useful. Storms make a mess. Hands make it less so. Simple. Past the second bend, the trail straightened into a long corridor between big timber. That's where I heard talking, not loud, just enough to float in with the mist. It sounded like 2 or 3 people off to my right, maybe 30 yards out, walking parallel. Not laughing, not arguing, just talking in that comfortable, everyday way. I stepped to the uphill side, figuring a group had cut a social path, and called, "Heads up, hiker on trail." Nothing answered. But the talking didn't stop either. It slid a little farther back, like water finding a lower channel. Called again, louder. "You folks all right?" The voices cut off clean, not faded. Cut like someone closed a door between us. I stood still a while and listened to my breath. The forest went tight around me, no raven, no wind, no drip. A stillness so complete it felt like pressure. I knew that stillness. Most people who work outside do. Something has stopped what it was doing to notice you. It isn't always a thing with teeth. Sometimes it's the weather. Sometimes it's your own pulse getting loud. Either way, if a silence feels chosen, you don't fill it with noise. You let it pass, I walked on. Not slow, not fast. Just the way you move through a room when you realize you weren't alone and decide to be polite about leaving. Half a mile later, I reached a flat shelf where the trail widened into a pocket meadow. There was a fire ring there, stones blackened from old nights. I'd eaten lunch at that ring in June. Now a new arrangement sat 10 feet beyond it, in the grass in perfect order. Someone had set out a blue rain jacket, a wool hat, one boot standing upright and the other laid on its side, a stove with its lid balanced edge on, and a paperback book. All of it was clean. That's what stuck first. The meadow was soaked and churned from elk, but those things were spotless. The jacket was zipped. The bootlaces were crossed neatly on themselves. The book's spine unbroken lay open to a title page. I could read the name written in permanent marker, E. Rowe. I knew a Rowe. Not well. I'd crossed a trailhead with her the month before. Erin, gray braid. The kind of hiker who carries an extra map for anybody who asks. I told myself it was a coincidence. Rowe is a common enough name. I told myself that as I stepped around the ring to get a better look. Then I stopped. There was a ring inside the ring. A perfect circle pressed into the grass, as if someone had laid a heavy hoop there for an hour and lifted it back off. All the items sat just inside that circle. None touched the stones. None touched each other. The jacket's cuff pointed at the trail like a compass needle. A long time ago, a search and rescue trainer told me something I didn't forget. When you see order where there shouldn't be, don't walk into it. He meant avalanche bowls and river ice, but it was the same idea. The woods make messes. People make patterns. If you find a pattern and no person, treat it like a snare. I took 2 photos from outside the ring and backed away the way I'd come. The talking started again as soon as I reached the trees. I didn't answer. I didn't look. I kept my eyes where my feet were going and counted my steps like a rope. 20, breathe. 20, breathe. The voices followed. Not closer, not farther, just level. Like a line traced next to me through the timber. At the next creek crossing, I knelt to check the footbridge stringer. That gave my hands a reason to shake. A leaf floated under the bridge and bumped a rock with a soft tap. I heard the same tap behind me by the trail, and my name in my voice said, "You hear that?" The voice was exact. Same rasp, same shape of breath. That broke something small in my chest. I stood, walked on, and didn't answer. By the time I reached the bench cut above Alder Draw, dusk had folded itself into the understory. Fog came low through the cedar trunks like it knew the place. I turned on my headlamp and kept it angled toward the ground. Light in the wrong spot can pin you in place like a pin through a specimen. Better to keep your bubble small and moving. The map in my pocket said I had 1.25 miles back to the truck if I stayed left at the junction. When I reached the junction, the left-hand sign was gone. The post was there, but the arrow was ripped clean off. The right-hand path held fresh boot tracks in mud. I crouched to look. Not one set, dozens. Big, small, bare, treaded, all looping over each other as if a crowd had turned circles for an hour. None of them stepped off the path. All kept about the same distance from the center line. It looked like the floor around a maypole would look if the ribbon were made of feet. My radio hissed. I pressed transmit and said the call sign for the local district. Static. I tried again, gave my location by landmark, and asked if anyone had eyes on a hiker named Rowe. The radio hissed. Then my radio answered me in my voice. District copy. Confirm name. Same cadence, same impatient dip on the last word. I didn't push the button. The radio clicked anyway, politely. You still there? I rolled the power switch to off and slid the radio into my pocket. I stayed on the main tread, set my pace to what runners call conversational, even though I didn't plan to talk. My headlamp threw a small pool ahead of me, enough to see the lip of rocks and the places where the trail narrowed around cedar roots. The fog thickened. The trees leaned in. The temperature sank a few hard degrees until my fingers stung. Then the quiet returned. Not the soft kind. The kind that presses. That made the decision for me. I didn't stop. I didn't speed up. I shortened my stride and loosened my shoulders like you do when a dog you don't know lowers its head on the other side of a fence. Every living thing can read a flinch. Don't give it one unless you're ready to run for real. There's a short section near the trailhead where the old works road crosses a cut bank and drops into a stand of second growth. I could smell the road dust before I saw the reflector. Relief made me clumsy. I scuffed a toe, windmilled, Caught myself against a sapling and laughed once out loud because falling right then felt like a punchline the woods would enjoy. Something moved to my left. Not a footfall. A shape, tall and lean against the fog just inside the first row of trunks. My headlamp caught no eyeshine. The shape shifted slightly as if remembering how to tilt. Beside it, another leaned at the same angle. Behind them more, spaced out evenly the way fence posts look along a straight run. They weren't silhouettes that matched any animal I knew. The height was wrong. The shoulders were wrong, and none of them stepped forward. They held just off the gravel, like the line between forest duff and roadbed meant something they didn't cross. Keep walking, I told my legs, like they were a separate creature that needed instructions. The figures didn't follow. The road felt too loud under my boots. My truck sat 50 yards ahead in the turnout, dark and dumb and beautiful. I unlocked it with the clicker. The figures didn't react. I opened the door, climbed in, shut it, locked it again out of superstition and habit, started the engine, and only then let my head fall back against the rest. No one was in the road. The fog hung at the tree line, a wall. My hands wanted to put the truck in gear and go, but my brain still had a job to finish. I radioed, this time through the truck unit on a high repeater, gave the grid, the conditions, the name from the book E-Row. A ranger answered, a real one. With a voice I knew and a call sign I'd heard for years. Copy, stay put if you can, she said. We're sending a unit, I stayed. The figures didn't move. 20 minutes later, a set of headlights came through the fog, tires crunching slow, and stopped behind me. The ranger walked up on my side and tapped the glass with a knuckle, the way people who spend their lives with wild things do. No loud surprises. I rolled the window down. You all right? She asked. I told her what I'd seen. I didn't look at the tree line while I did it. She didn't either. She stared at my mud-splashed knees and my shaking hands. We've got SAR on call, she said. We'll take a look at first light. What about now? I asked. She turned her head a little, listening to a radio traffic I couldn't hear. Now is dark, she said. We've learned not to do certain kinds of looking in the dark. She didn't add any more. She didn't need to. I followed her back into town. At the station, I filled out a form that felt like a grocery list. Time, location, description, the name from the book. A man in a county jacket took my photos off my camera and copied them to a drive. He offered me coffee. The cup had a chip on the rim that caught my lip the way a cold zipper catches skin. I thanked him and didn't drink it. An EMT wrapped my left ankle where the sapling had bit me. You'll be sore tomorrow, she said and smiled like that was a blessing. At dawn, the crews went up. They walked my line with dogs. They found the clean items in the meadow gone. They found the maypole print smeared into nothing by rain. The ring at the firestones had filled with leaves overnight, as if it had never been pressed at all. They didn't find Aaron. They didn't find any other Aaron either, because maybe the name in the book belonged to somebody else. And if I kept it that way in my head, I could go home. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. A deputy asked me to come by the office. He didn't say why over the line. He didn't have to. The book with the name on the title page sat on his desk. He tapped it with a pen, gentle like you would touch a sleeping animal. We found this at the West Kiosk, he said, leaning against the map. Nothing else. No pack, no jacket, no boot. He hesitated. You sure you saw all that? I'm sure what I saw was arranged, I said. He nodded like that was enough truth to write down. Then he slid a plastic bag across the desk. Inside were 2 photos printed on cheap paper. The first showed the spur lot where I'd parked, taken from the trees. You could see my truck and you could see me kneeling to tie a lace. The second photo showed the old CCC path, 100 yards from the lot. In that one, I had my back to the camera walking in. In the trees on both sides, shapes stood at even intervals. They were clearer in the print than in my head. Tall, narrow, far enough apart that if you looked quick, you'd call them trunks and move on. Close enough together that if you stared, your heart climbed your throat. Trail cam? I asked. Though we both knew there weren't any trail cams on that path, he shook his head. We don't know the source. You don't have metadata on the file? I asked, then heard myself. Heard the part of me that grabs onto technical words to keep from falling into the hole. Timestamps blank, he said. Printer ink's cheap. We're running what we can. I slid the photos back across the desk. Keep them, I said. I don't need copies. That night I slept with the little radio from my pack on the nightstand, turned off, antenna unscrewed. Sometime after 2, when the town went all the way quiet, I woke to the sound of my voice down the hall. Not loud, just how you'd speak to someone in a tent beside yours so you wouldn't wake other sleepers. The words weren't words, not at first, just my cadence, my shape of breath. Then it said my name the way I say my name when I'm working, and someone asks for me and I'm already moving in that direction. I didn't answer. I didn't get up. I lay there and counted my breath and told my legs what to do if my door handle turned. They didn't need to. The voice went away the way fog goes, not leaving so much as forgetting to remain. In the morning, I put the radio in a drawer and slid it shut. I made coffee that tasted like metal and poured it out. I packed a bag and drove east until the trees thinned and the hills turned to open land. I took a job mending fence on a ranch where you can see trouble coming a mile away, even if it's only dust and a bad idea. On the first day, the foreman tried to hand me a 2-way. I told him I'd call in on breaks from my phone. He gave me a look that said, "Men who won't carry radios are usually men who make other kinds of trouble." I told him I was a quiet kind of problem, and I work fast. Sometimes the wind in the grass still finds my cadence and hands it back to me. Sometimes I wake in the dark, certain there's a neat circle of clean things on my kitchen floor. I don't turn on the light to check. If the forest wants to talk in my voice again, it can do it to the ceiling. I haven't gone back to Alderdraw. If anybody asks why, I tell them storms move bridges and I've moved on. It isn't the full truth. But the full truth is a pattern, and patterns are for stepping around. If there's a rule in any of this, it's small enough to keep in your mouth for when you need it. When the quiet is aiming at you, leave like you meant to go. When the woods sound like you, shut up. And when someone has set the stage and forgotten to show up, don't climb onto it and make yourself the actor. By late October 2021, Eastern Oregon felt like a second address to me. I was 34, working a 4-day week at the bike shop in Redmond, and spending most free Saturdays chasing altitude and quiet. That morning, a weak front was sliding in off the coast. The forecast said wind and rain after sundown, so I had a tidy window to do a quick loop and be home before the first band hit the high desert. I drove toward the Ochocos instead of my usual bend haunts. New miles, familiar country, and aimed for a route locals sometimes call Elk Step Loop, a 3-hour figure 8 that threads lava boulders and old fir like a needle through thick cloth. The pullout on Forest Road 415 was empty when I rolled in at noon. Fine by me. Shoulder seasons make trails honest. No crowds, just weather and whatever lives under the trees. I shrugged into my beat-up osprey with the duct-taped strap, tightened it until the weight sat right on the hips, and breathed in that pre-storm edge when pine, pitch, and wet mineral smell like a coin, held under the tongue. No jays scolding, no chickadees bouncing twig to twig, just wind way up high. If I'd listened harder to that hush, I might have made a different choice. I didn't. I clicked the car locked and stepped off. The first switchbacks climbed through Douglas fir and scattered larch going soft yellow. Breath found its rhythm. Boots found the line. I passed the snag a lightning blast had torn open 2 winters back. Black heart timber flaked like charcoal. A basalt fin rose to the right like a shoulder blade. I call it the ox. Everyone else says thumb. Hikers collect names the way fishermen collect lies. At the creek crossing, I knelt to refill a bottle and saw the mud was a story written in one direction. Deer slots, raccoon hands, a bear's half-moon pads, even hair. Every print pointed downhill like a set of arrows leaving the mountain all at once. It looked less like passing traffic and more like an evacuation. Storm pushing them early, I told myself. Snapped a photo out of habit for the trail group chat I lurk in, and climbed on. The trail pinched between 2 boulders the size of vans, a stone doorway into darker timber. Usually chipmunks run patrol there, none today. The temperature slid 10 degrees in 20 minutes, so I zipped the orange fleece my sister Mara insists I wear anytime a hunter might mistake me for a 4-legged thing. That color would matter later, just not the way anyone imagines in October. 2 miles in, I hit the junction where the loop splits, a higher line that rises to meadows below a volcanic knob. and a lower lane that snakes through thicker wood and pops out faster near the road. The plan had been up, then over, then down. The plan stopped moving when I saw the trees. It wasn't one trunk with a random ragged patch you could chalk up to stretching claws. 7, maybe 8 firs around the junction wore fresh, deliberate gouges, all cut in sets of 4, all starting high and raking low, clean through bark into pale cambium. The spacing was wider than my hand splayed wide. Sap wept slow like clear blood. On the ground, curls of new wood lay bright as onion skin. I've seen black bear marks plenty. They don't usually organize themselves into a rough ring around a decision point on a trail. Cougars leave sign too, but not like somebody with careful hands had been practicing the same motion on every tree. I stood there longer than I want to admit, trying to fit what I knew into what I saw. Brains are little lawyers. They argue until the world makes sense enough to keep going. Big bear, I thought, or 2. Or some jerk with a climbing tool doing TikTok fieldcraft. Excuses stacked neatly. Meanwhile, my skin crawled with the old simple instruction. Turn around. I didn't. I told myself the higher meadows would give me sight lines, took a picture of the longest cut for no good reason, and chose the climb. I checked my phone, 2:06 p.m., and typed a text. Weird scratches at elk step split, probably bear back by 5. The bubble said sent. Later in my call log, it never existed. The forest steepened into blow-down puzzle pieces from a fire years back. Step over, duck under, balance on. That stuttering gait steals attention, and I was watching my feet so hard I almost missed the way the woods went wrong. The usual chorus had drained out. No gnats in the gold light, no tiny trickles under the duff. All I had was my breath and the rasp of nylon loud as a chainsaw in a library. Instinct honed by a lot of solo miles, lit up like a switchboard. Watched, tracked, measured. I started doing those fake scenic pauses where you turn to admire a slope and actually scan the line you just walked. Twice, something the color of dead grass slipped across the edge of my sight and was gone when I looked straight on. Could have been nothing. Could have been everything. A low sound rolled in above me and left and then came back again. Deep, steady. Too big to be a house cat purr and too smooth to be a growl. I've heard cougars on recordings and once from a distance at night. The dying woman scream nobody forgets. This was not that. This had chest in it, size, every nerve begged to sprint. Sprinting from predators is a great way to teach them your prey. I forced myself to keep the same walking pace and made noise, any noise. Because people are trouble, and trouble teaches some things to avoid you. I talked to the trees like a camp counselor. Nice pine cone. Great sky. Love your moss. I knocked the bottle against my hip belt. Stupid to narrate, maybe, but it kept my voice out in front of me. And that felt like something. I thumbed my phone up thinking 911, because I also know what adrenaline tells you to do and how often it lies, and watched the single bar drop to none. I hit record anyway. There's a 47-second clip on my cloud now that is mostly jittery bark and a flash of my sleeve. If you crank the volume, you can hear a motor quiet rumble underneath my chatter. It's there when I step, and there when I stop, and there when I start again. The switchback below the ridge is cut around a granite block big enough to hide a pickup. I cleared the corner and almost collided with it. Not a rock, not a man. An animal planted in the trail 20 feet away, standing as if it had chosen the center line on purpose. Memory keeps trying to sand the edges off that shape. Make it a regular cougar so the story sits better at kitchen tables. The measurement doesn't hold. It was heavier through the shoulders than any cat I've seen in Oregon, 200 maybe more, and carried itself like it knew exactly where every tendon tied into bone. Coat a plain tawny dragged with darker smudges down the spine like a hand had wiped soot there. Ears low and round, tail running out straight behind like a thick rope. The eyes set me cold, not just the shine of afternoon. A focus that read you the way you read a sign, quickly and completely. We looked at each other for a count I felt in my teeth. Then its mouth pulled back without opening, the way a dog smiles when it's learned a joke and wants you to see it understands. The rumble started again, visible now, the throat vibrating smooth. I don't remember deciding. One frame of memory is me stuck to the ground, every bit of air welding me there. The next is brush slapping my legs and my pack trying to lever me sideways. I cut off the trail down a seam between fir and manzanita. because my body wanted obstacles between me and those eyes, even if smart money says never leave your known line in a panic. Behind me, not a crash, not a chase. That steady, measured moving sound, like someone unrolling carpet at a funeral. Casual, certain. A root caught my boot and I went down hard to hands and one knee. The thing was on me and then not. A strike across my back blew the pack sideways. Nylon popped like paper. One strap parted with a zip, and I shrugged out of the other on reflex, abandoned a week's worth of small gear to the ferns, and ran without it. Behind me, the sound paused the way a person pauses when they find something interesting on the ground. That 30 seconds was a gift I didn't think about until later, when SAR handed me my water bottle from a log, 20 yards off, punctured neatly twice and spaced like something had nipped it. Between canines or my map from a brush pile. Not shredded by claws, but torn in even strips, as if hands had done it slow just to feel the paper go. Noise ended all at once. Not faded into distance, stopped. Sometimes that's better. Sometimes it's worse. I didn't test which. I slammed down toward the lower line and burst out on the easy tread, stumbling like a drunk. I don't remember the last mile. I remember gravel. I remember the first fat raindrops making dark circles around my shoes. I remember not looking long at the tree line at the lot, because looking would have been an invitation, and I had already given enough. My car coughed to life on the second try. I drove for the ranger station in Prinville with my hands buzzing like I'd grabbed a live fence. I must have looked half feral coming through that door. Scratches streaking the orange, mud to the thighs, because the ranger behind the counter didn't ask for a story at first. He dialed a number and said my name and a mile marker and possible big cat encounter to whoever answered. Then he poured me water and waited until my breath belonged to me again. He introduced himself as Decker. 20 years in the district? He listened while I told it straight. He didn't make faces. When I hit the part with the smile and the purr you could see move a throat. He didn't write the words imagination or panic in the margin. He reached under the counter, pulled out a plaster cast wrapped in a garbage bag, and set it on the desk between us. From September, he said. Canyon 3 ridges over. No scale in the photo, so here. He put his palm on it. The pad was big as his hand and the toes made 4 moons. The width penciled on the edge read 7.8 inches. That's too much cougar. That's too much anything here. He was careful with language after that. Agencies like theirs have to be, he said, anomalous sign. He said behavior outside typical. He said we're looking. He also said 3 separate parties. Old hand hikers, not day-tripping flatlanders, had described the same heavy animal with odd spinal markings and a watchfulness that felt wrong. No prints anyone trusted. No hair they could DNA. Just stories that fit together a little too well. They closed Elk Step the next morning with a weather notice zip-tied to the post so the rumor didn't carry teeth. The paper stayed there 3 months while a pair of grad students from OSU hopped between tree trunks mounting cameras. Nothing. Card after card full of elk and bobcat and deer and one skinny bear. The thing I saw either moved on or knew glass when it smelled it. In January, the chain came off the gate. A new aluminum sign suggested hiking in groups and making noise. Officially, they reopened for winter hazard cleared. In the shops and bars, folks said different words soft. You hear them if you listen like a local? I swore I wouldn't go back alone. Swore it hot. In November the next year, I broke it. 6 of us together, broad daylight, plenty of voices. Every pack sprouting bells like a kindergarten line. We reached the junction where the gouged firs had stood. The stumps wore clean saw cuts. Someone had taken the problem home. Even so, in the raked duff you could track where other boots had stopped and turned and looked up. Same spot I had, as if memory were pinned to the air there. There's one last piece people always ask about. The video. It's 8 seconds of blur and breath, and ends on a frame where light catches 2 green gold coins low to the ground. You can convince yourself it's pareidolia. You can convince yourself it's glare. You can also turn the volume to max and hear the motor that isn't a motor. Right before my breath goes spare, and my feet cut left through brush. Someone posted a ripped copy and called it fake in the comments. I didn't answer. I don't watch it anymore. I don't need a screen for that sound. The shop guys still poke me about the fleece. Blaze looks good on you, Joaquin says, grinning, and I grin back because jokes are armor. At night, once in a while, some part of the house sighs and my brain drags up the purr, not as a noise but as pressure, the sense of a chest big enough to make a note you feel in bone. I sit up and listen hard for wind and plumbing, and the dumb, ordinary things that prove you're inside a human world. When I find them, I breathe. When I don't, I wait without moving and let the quiet pass through like weather. I still hike. I vet partners more than routes now. No solo loops beyond a certain hour. No bravado about how many times I've done a trail. Wild places take that kind of pride and turn it in their teeth like a stick. The last time I was near Elkstep, a guy at the trailhead with a bright new pack asked if he could tag along because he didn't love the vibe. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We talked boots and bikes and how small the world feels from a ridge, and how big it does in certain stands of fur. We didn't talk about what stares back sometimes. If you want the neat ending, there isn't one. There's the loop that still exists on the map. There's the line in the station log where a ranger wrote my name and encounter in a box and underlined it once. There's whatever padded along a contour beside me and measured me the way a carpenter measures wood before a cut. Maybe it was some illegal hybrid an idiot raised wrong and turned loose. Maybe it was a cougar that learned too much from the years we spent hunting the ones that didn't run. Maybe it was a thing that has been here longer than our names for ridgelines and needed me to know that just a little. I don't owe it a myth. It doesn't owe me proof. It showed me its attention. I gave it my distance. That's a bargain I can live with so far. By early December 2021, I finally felt like the pieces of my life were clicking. I was 35, 6 months into a full-time developer role at a mapping startup in Corvallis, after years of short contracts and odd gigs. My girlfriend, Alina, and I had spent the long weekend in La Grande with her folks. We left late Sunday to beat the Monday rush. Coffee in a thermos, baked rolls in a tin on the floorboard. Our old blue Outback humming west toward the Cascades, US 20 over Santiam Pass, is a drive I know by muscle memory. Black firs crowding the shoulders, snow stacked in drifts under the branches. These sudden views where the mountains jump at you between the trees. Alina fell asleep around Detroit Lake, cheek against her scarf, while I took the curves slow. The sky did that winter thing where it goes from peach to purple in a single bend. I remember thinking how lucky I was and how ordinary that luck felt. The good kind of ordinary. The kind you stop noticing until you decide to. Twilight had just settled when I noticed a vehicle on the turnout ahead. An old panel truck, cream paint, late 90s. Sat crooked, half on gravel, half in snow, driver's door gaping. The dome light washed a weak yellow onto the needles below. Out there, with the temperature already sinking, nobody leaves a door open unless something's wrong, or they sprint it off without thinking. I eased the Subaru to a stop behind it. Left the engine running and clicked the hazards. Alina stirred, rubbing her eyes. Flat? She asked. Don't know, I said. Doors open. She sat up at once. That's who she is. Helps first, questions after. She grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight. I pulled my knit hat down and walked up, calling, "Hello? You okay? Need a tow?" The trees didn't answer. It wasn't regular forest quiet either. Usually you hear wind somewhere high, a jay complaining, melted snow dropping from a limb. This was the kind of stillness you get in a hallway when someone holds a breath to hear behind a door. Inside the truck, 2 worn captain's chairs, fast food bags, an avalanche of coffee cups in the footwell. A handheld radio was zip-tied to the headliner, red LED lit, speaker hissing. Every few seconds, a voice stuttered through the static and recited numbers in blocks. Not Police 10 codes, not NOAA, just strings. 3, 7, 4, 1, 8, 6, 3, 7. Alina's light slid past my shoulder and hit the ground by the back wheel. "Evan," she said, voice small. "Look, shoes, little ones, spotted the dirt and snow. Cartoon sneakers, Velcro straps, glittered high tops. The kind of soles that flash when a kid stomps. 5, 6, maybe more. Some tossed, some set down neatly in pairs, toes pointing away from the road into the trees. A tiny navy sneaker still wore a price sticker on its arch. Another had fresh grit laced into the tread. Like it had just come off a foot, I touched the hood out of reflex and yanked my hand back. Warm. Whoever drove the truck had been here minutes ago. No service. Alina said, staring at her phone. That stretch dips and rises. Bars come and go like fish. The radio above us clicked and spit again. The numbers stopped. The speaker squealed. Then a voice said, clear as if someone stood 10 feet away. 2 at the turnout. Woman, brown hair, ponytail. Man, green jacket. Blue Outback. Plate starts with BQ. Alina's ponytail flipped when she turned. I looked down at my jacket. Old forest green Columbia. The one Alina calls my Ranger cosplay. Whoever was talking could see us. Not in a general way. In a right now, this second way. Evan, she said, already pulling at my sleeve. We should go, I nodded. And then movement, there in the timber 40 feet back, stopped me. At first I thought it was snow snagged on brush. Then the snow shifted like a person's shoulder would. 2 figures stood dead still among the trunks. They wore pale coveralls, dirty white reinforced at the knees and elbows, with hoods up, faces behind respirators and dark goggles. The lenses caught our headlights like animal eyes. One held a pole with a looped cable at the end. Not the animal control kind exactly. More loops like a bunch of snares fused together. The other had a canister slung underhand, a nozzle fat and flared. They hadn't stepped toward us. They were just there, watching. Their heads tilted in the same odd angle, like 2 people listening closely to the same frequency. Deeper in the trees, 4 or 5 more pale shapes drifted parallel, spaced with intention. One of the front 2 lifted a hand and chopped 3 gestures into the air. Us, the truck, then a circle. The line in the timber spread out to our left and right like a sliding gate. We ran. There were maybe 20 feet between the truck and our bumper, but it felt like a field. Snow squeaked. Boots slipped. Behind us, metal clinked on webbing, and that radio voice narrated in a flat tone. Subjects returning to vehicle. Initiate 3. Come on, I muttered to my own hands as I jammed the key. The Outback fired on the 3rd roll. I yanked reverse, swung, and nosed back onto the lane. 2 in coveralls reached the edge of the asphalt and planted themselves, arms out wide like they expected me to hit the brakes. I didn't. I went around them too fast, tires yelling. In the mirror, I saw a pale arm come up and lob a thing the size of a fat spray can. It hit our rear glass with a heavy, wet thud. A clear gel splashed and ran, then frosted, then spiderwebbed into hard, crystalline lace. The back window turned into a warped lens I couldn't see through. Alina had her body twisted around in the seat. There, she started and then stopped. They're just watching. We gained distance and the turnout vanished behind a wall of fur. For a half mile, neither of us spoke. My hands hurt from how hard I held the wheel. When the first bar flickered alive on the dash, Alina punched 911. We took the first gas station we saw, too bright, too public, which is exactly what I wanted. Parked under the lights by the door, and stayed there with the engine on while she gave the dispatcher our mile marker, and what little sense I could put into sentences. Units are already responding to a call there, the dispatcher said. The line fuzzed. Stay where you are. Officers en route. I stepped out to look at the glass. The gel had already slumped and thinned into nothing, leaving the rear windshield oddly waved, as if it had languished in too much sun. No residue, no odor. If I hadn't felt the splat, I might have accused myself of a panic invention. Oregon State Police rolled in 20 minutes later. 2 cars, 2 troopers. They had that tired, careful look public safety people get after a long weekend. They split us for statements, then pulled our car around so their dash cams could see the window while we talked. The older one, sergeant by the stripes, asked for photos. Alina scrolled. Everything she'd taken near the turnout had turned into black squares with little error triangles. She tried twice more. Same result, they went to the turnout. When they came back, they were wearing the polite faces people use around frightened strangers. We found the vehicle you described, the sergeant said. Empty, no radio. No kids' issues. Registration belongs to a Boise man who reported it stolen. He paused. There were fresh tire tracks in the turnout. Probably whoever dumped it came back. Or someone else stopped. It's a busy corridor. It wasn't busy, I said. I heard the edge bleed into my voice and forced it flat again. We were the only car for 10 minutes in both directions. The other trooper, younger, glanced at my jacket, at Alina's hands shaking on her phone and then away. We've had unusual calls out here this month, he said. soft enough to be almost to his own notepad. Nothing we can prove, just odd reports. The sergeant shot him a quick look that meant knock it off. Then he gave us his card and told us to call if we remembered details. He also said something that felt polite and real at the same time. If you have to come through the pass after dark, stick to I-84 next time. More traffic, more lights. We drove home the long way, down to Salem, over to Albany, then south to Corvallis, because I couldn't bear the thought of seeing the turnouts creep by in the dark, wondering who might be standing just inside the line of trees. Alina held my sleeve the whole way. Neither of us turned on music.
When I finally unlocked our apartment, the heater kicked on with a clank that made us both flinch, and then laugh a little at ourselves for flinching. For a week,
I woke up from dreams that were more like memories. Except in the dreams, the shoes weren't only in the turnout. They showed up in other places. Under the kitchen table, on the stairs at work, sitting in pairs by our front door with toes pointing in. Alina kept asking, what were they doing? And my answer stayed the same, I didn't know. I still don't. The not knowing is the part that sticks. I tried to make sense of it in daylight the way we all do now, by looking for other people who'd seen what I saw. I searched for similar incidents instead of working on the caching bug I was supposed to fix. I found forum threads about abandoned cars and cleanup crews, and photos of white trucks on dirt roads. 90% looked like bored people entertaining bored people. 10% felt like something else. Specific details, the kind you can't invent if you weren't there. None of them were Santiam. None had those children's shoes. 2 weeks later, a blocked number lit my phone while I was frying onions for dinner. I almost let it go to voicemail. Habit made me swipe. Nothing. Just air and the soft, ever so slight crackle you hear when someone is there but doesn't speak. I said hello. The voice that answered was the same voice from that radio above the truck's visor. Flat. Cadenced. Stop looking. Stop telling the story. Your interest has been noted. Click. I stood in my kitchen with the pan smoking until the alarm chirped, and Alina came out and fanned it with a towel, asking if I'd spaced or if everything was okay. I said it was fine. It wasn't. We started using the interstate for holiday trips even when it added 2 hours. I stopped trying to string all the bits online into a neat rope. You can hang yourself with a rope like that. Alina and I didn't make it. I wish the reason was more noble or more boring. She wanted to forget and keep the parts of life that felt safe. I wanted to understand, which is just a nice way to say I didn't know how to put the curiosity down. We stayed kind to each other. We cried on the same couch. She packed her plants and her grandmother's blanket and left in May. The ring I bought in November is still tucked in the back of my desk in a sock, which is both pathetic and human. Every now and then I'll be driving behind an old work van or a bread truck and feel my stomach hitch against the belt. I tell myself to breathe, to read the bumper stickers, to notice the ladder racks and oil stains and all the normal things that make a thing only a thing. But then the shoulder will open into a pullout for chain up, and I'll see pine needles thick like carpet, and the smell of cold sap will come through the vents, and for half a second the world will tilt, just a little, and I'll see those small shoes in my mind, toes turned toward the timber, soles clean like they'd barely been walked on. People ask, if they've heard a soft version of the story, what I think it was. I have answers that fit in sentences. A stolen truck repurposed by nasty people. A crew using equipment I don't know to do something I don't understand. A bad coincidence that clicked into place. Those answers are useful. They let you sleep. There's another answer I don't speak much out loud. It's less a theory than a feeling that reaches up from the gut. It says some groups move through the cracks in a system and know exactly where those cracks are. It says if you see them by accident, they have a file for that. It says the forest can be a wall and a hallway at the same time. And sometimes the wrong door is open, and you don't know you've stepped through until someone starts talking about you in a voice that never changes. Last month, heading to Sisters for a day of snowshoeing with friends. We stopped at a diner in Sweet Home. I went out to the car to grab my gloves and saw a state police SUV at the pump. The trooper at the hose looked up, met my eye, then looked at the wave in our rear glass where that gel had distorted it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He capped the tank, climbed in, and pulled onto 20 East like all of us do. into trees that most days are simply trees. I still think about those kids' shoes. I hope they were props for a sick game, because the alternative is worse. I hope they were nothing more than stage trash and somebody somewhere is in jail for it already. Hope is cheap and necessary. I keep both kinds. If you ever come up on a turnout at dusk and something about the arrangement of objects makes your shoulders rise without your permission, you'll know. You won't need me. You won't need a stranger's story on the internet. Your body will send a simple memo. We can help or we can leave, and there may not be a road between those two things tonight. Choose fast. Don't wait for a voice to decide for you. By late September 2022, I was 34 and still trying to pretend I loved big alpine pushes as much as I used to. I'd said yes to one more climb, because my friend Matteo sounded happier on the phone than I'd heard him in a year. Easy weather window, he kept saying. 2 days up the Coleman-Deming, tagged the top back in time for tacos. We parked at the heliotrope trailhead under a clean, cold sky. The pumice dust had that graphite look it gets before the first real snow, and the air smelled like cedar and cold iron. Matteo checked his watch altimeter every few minutes as we wound through the last trees and out onto the moraine. He swore the barometer had twitched. I said it was nothing. Mountains don't listen to us anyway. We hit the lower glacier early and moved together on a 50-meter rope, stepping over black mouths that opened where the sun had been busy. Higher, the surface hardened. I could feel my crampon points bite and sing. We reached our planned bivvy on a wind-scooped bench around 6,900 feet in the afternoon. The plan was simple. Hot food, early bag, alpine start up the Roman wall at dawn. Then the wind arrived like someone flipped a switch on the ridge. It didn't build. It began. One clean shove that bowed the fabric in my hands as I fed tent poles. Matteo laughed at the first gust that yanked the fly out of his grip. This short, disbelieving bark. If Nina knew I brought a storm home early, he said, shaking his head, and raised his voice to finish the sentence because the next gust was louder. We wrestled the shelter into place with snow stakes and dead men we buried deeper than made sense. I melted snow in the vestibule until steam fogged my glasses. The evening light went flat like the color had been drained from it. Matteo slid into his bag and scrolled through the forecast on the inReach. Still says high pressure, he mumbled. Maybe this is just ridge venting. I woke sometime after midnight to a sound I couldn't file. Wind, yes, steady, freight train wind that made the tent poles flex and groan. But under it something slower, heavier, moving in a circle. Not spindrift skittering, not cornice fall. Wait, steps. They traced the arc of our shelter and stopped at the vestibule zipper. The storm swallowed everything after that except my pulse. In the morning, the world had been erased. Visibility cut to a gray wall 15, maybe 20 feet out. The tent was frosted white on the inside. When I unzipped, spindrift filled my lap. The sky had vanished. The line between glacier and air blurred to a single color. We should punch down now, I said, voice hoarse. Give it a couple hours, Matteo said, still hopeful. He'd run another weather pull before we lost the satellite window. The model keeps pushing the front late. While we sat hunched at the stove trying to keep the flame alive, I told him what I'd heard in the night. I expected a shrug and a joke about nervous ears. Instead, he went pale. I thought you were out cold, he said. It made a circuit. Pressed here, he traced the tent wall. Like it wanted to find a seam. We gave the wind an hour. It gave us a broken tent pole. The crack was so sharp I flinched, and for a stupid second I was sure something had fired a round through the fabric. We didn't talk. We packed, we tied in. The white moved with us like a room we couldn't leave. We had wandered the route to camp the day before, dropping thin bamboo with bright tape at anything that felt like a blind corner. I thought we'd find them by feel if not by sight. The wind had other plans. Our sticks were gone. New drifts rose where the glacier had been firm yesterday. Flat went concave. Safe went question mark. We followed the track on Matteo's GPS until the line and our feet stopped agreeing. Somewhere in the white, the arrow slid east. The world under our point softened and then crusted and then softened again. We probed with our axes and stepped in faith. An hour later, the unit insisted we were 500 feet off the line. My stomach sank the way it does when you realize you've been reading a map upside down. Shelter first, Matteo said. his voice muffled by his buff in the wind. Then we fixed the problem. The thing we found wasn't a cave exactly. It was the space that happens when ice lifts from rock and leaves a blue mouth behind. A bergschrund peeled open against the head wall. Today, with the wind slamming us sideways and the sky turned to milk, it looked like salvation. We dropped into the lee side and the noise cut in half. I could hear my own breath again. Inside, our headlamps painted the ice in bruise colors. We guyed the broken tent in a not-to-code way, running lines to screws and rock nubbins, and started the stove again. The inReach hunted and hunted. No text went. No weather came. The cave's floor had a skim of rime on it that crunched under our boots and made the sound of crushed sugar. Mateo touched my sleeve and pointed his light toward the dark back of the void. The rime wasn't empty. Tracks stepped in a clean line away from us and back into the narrow. They weren't boots. They weren't paw prints either. Each impression was long, wider at the pad, and ended in points that looked too slender to be claws. I couldn't tell you why that shape bothered me as much as it did. It just did. The edges were sharp and wet. If they'd been older, the frost would have softened them. "We'll take turns," I said, as if saying the plan made it safe. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. I took first watch while Mateo tried to sleep with his hat pulled to his eyebrows. The stove hissed. Ice clicked in the walls like a house in winter. And somewhere deeper than our light could reach, something moved. If you've spent time outdoors, you know the sound of an animal that's used to being quiet. This wasn't that. It didn't sneak. It didn't stomp. It came forward in 3 or 4 careful steps, stopped and waited like it was listening to our listening. When I whispered Mateo's name, it retreated the same measured number of steps, then waited again. He sat up. We both stared at the dark while our headlamp beams cut nothing. A sound scraped the ice. I thought of fingernails on a school desk, scaled up to a size you don't want to imagine. "We're going," he said. No discussion left in it. We left. We slammed back into weather that felt like it wanted to push us through the glacier rather than let us cross it. The rope between us stayed tight because it had to. We aimed the GPS dot toward a lower contour and told ourselves we could fix the mistake by trading time for elevation. Every few minutes the wind went from bad to worse, and we braced into it like 2 people shoving the same door. Stopping cost us heat, but moving blind cost us sense, and neither of us had extra to spend. And under it all, under wind and the squeal of spindrift, I kept hearing that drag. Not steps. Drag. Like weight pulled across ice by something that didn't care if it left a mark. At a place where the glacier rolled into a shorter, steeper pitch, Mateo's crampon snagged. He cursed and bent to free it. I turned to block the wind and flashed my beam behind us. The light hit white like it had all day, then found shape inside it. Backlit snow lifted a silhouette maybe 20 feet away, tall and wrong. The proportions weren't human or animal in a way I had a word for. Arms too long for its torso, back too tall relative to the hips, movement like a puppet getting used to gravity. The beam jittered in my hand. When the light hit what should have been a face, I didn't see features. I saw pale and smooth and the glint of something wet. "Go," I said, because the word was all I had. We headed down. There are hours of that descent I can't string in order. We kicked through bridges we should have tested longer. We rappelled a serac with anchors I'd be ashamed to admit to a climbing class. The altimeter numbers slid down. Nothing we passed looked familiar. The white made everything equal. Somewhere in that nowhere, the rope went slack. It didn't go light like someone fell. It went loose like someone had cut a dress string. I hauled. The coils came easy. I kept hauling because denial is strong. Then I had the tail in my hand. The core of the rope stuck out in a fray like chewed celery. The sheath had been sheared smooth. I screamed until the wind made my throat sting. I told myself he was on a ledge, that the rope had caught on a sharp edge and popped. I yelled his name into my buff and nothing yelled back. The world was noise and fear and the learned habits that stop fear from turning to a kind of freeze you don't come back from. Step 1. Shelter. Step 2. Heat. Step 3. Wait. I probed ahead with my axe and found a drifted lip on the lee side of a roll. I tunneled until I could crawl inside. It was a child-sized burrow at best, but the wind dropped to a hiss in there, and the noise in my head stopped long enough for my hands to work again. I melted snow to drink and forced down a bar that tasted like cardboard and salt. My satellite unit still spun and gave me nothing. At some point in a gray hour that could have been midnight or 4 a.m., something arrived outside my little white coffin. I didn't see it. I heard it breathe. Not the way a person does when they're cold and miserable. Slow. Big. Air moved through something cavernous. It circled. It paused where the thin wall felt closest to my shoulder. It sniffed, and the sniff sounded too high off the ground to be anything that belongs on a mountain. I turned out my headlamp because the light felt like a beacon rather than a comfort. I wrapped my hand around the ice axe shaft so tight the adze dug into my palm, and I sat. I counted my breaths in 4 counts until the numbers made their own dull music. The breathing outside paced on. When it moved away at last, I waited 3 more songs worth of counting before I risked opening the tunnel. The storm didn't break so much as settle. The white turned to a paler white. I could see the next 10 steps, then the next. The first thing I noticed was the mess around my hole. The snow outside the little doorway was stamped in circles and loops like a herd had panicked there. Some of the prints looked almost like feet and some didn't. One set showed long pads ending in slender points. Another looked like something had set down a hand and then dragged it. I headed down. I chose down and stuck with it. The GPS said I was around 9,000 feet. The numbers meant nothing without a ridgeline to hang them on. But down still meant trees eventually. And trees meant windbreak and better odds. The thing I saw next didn't make sense until my brain let it. A flash of red snapped in the wind and then lay down again against a small ice cliff. I reached it in 50 steps. Matteo's summit shell hung there, shredded into ribbons caught on a fin. The parallel tiers were too even to be rock scrapes. There was no blood in the snow. His GPS unit lay half buried nearby, tracks still displayed. A useless bright line that didn't match where I stood. I put the unit in my pocket because there was nothing else I could do that wasn't grief. And grief wouldn't get me to the trees. The drag sound followed my pauses and faded when I moved. I didn't look back. The first bent hemlocks at the edge of the glacier looked like saints. Whatever had been behind me stopped at the forest line. I felt it more than saw it. A pressure lifting when the first branches closed over me. I kept walking because stopping felt like a dare. The snow turned heavy with needles in it. I started to believe I might make it to a path I knew. When the Kennedy Ridge Junction sign rose out of the drift like a relic, I put both hands on the post and cried into the wood. I got a satellite ping there. The words I sent were short and dumb and true. En route, 1 down, alive at sign. A rescue team reached me in the dark and hauled me like a kid to the snowcat. Someone wrapped me in a foil blanket and asked me questions I couldn't answer in a row. They searched 5 days after the sky cleared. They found our tent where I said it would be, collapsed and half buried and torn. They found the bergschrund we'd used, half filled with new snow, and the floor where the rime had been scuffed into shapes nobody wrote down. They found pieces of Matteo's outer layers spaced along a 1/4 mile of broken blue. They didn't find Matteo, the report says. Probable fall into crevasse during whiteout conditions. It says rope failure. Known possible edge cut. It says no credible evidence of wildlife involvement at this elevation. The photos I'd tried to take with frozen hands show mostly white and the shine of lamp against ice. If you turn them upside down and squint, you can convince yourself the wind drew lines there and not anything else. In early November, when the first low snow dusted town and my therapist told me to do one small thing I could control, I drove back up the highway alone and parked at an overlook. Baker sat so clean against the blue it looked painted. I brought binoculars because I wanted to do something with my hands. I scanned the glacier until the light went flat and my eyes ached. I caught it once. I don't expect you to believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either months earlier. It stepped out from behind a serac in the glare like a shadow learning to walk. Tall, crooked in the way a long puppet is crooked on its first day. Sun flashed on red. It wore a torn jacket sleeve I knew too well. The figure turned and raised one arm the way people do when they recognize someone in a crowd. Then it slid behind the ice again and didn't come out. I haven't gone high since. I tell people I quit because I lost my partner, and that's true. The other truth is smaller and uglier. If the wind hits my house just right at night, the siding flexes and the roof hums, and sometimes there's a slow, deliberate scrape along the eave that moves from corner to corner. and stops above the back door. When it's quiet like that, I remember the circle around our tent and the way a sound can learn your shape. I still scroll shops and check weather charts some mornings because old habits take time to die. When a fall high pressure sits over the state and the ridge cams show a world washed and bright, I feel that twitch in my calves and the old tug in my chest. Then I boil coffee and put the rope in the closet a little deeper. If someone asked me for a rule, I'd give a boring one. Go down when the mountain tells you to go down. Listen with your body first and your gear second. Don't trust a forecast over the feeling that the world has changed a notch to the left. And if you ever hear measured steps in a night that should be empty, don't argue with the part of you that recognizes the rhythm. You don't have to name a thing to know it means you harm. I keep Mateo's GPS on my desk. It still powers up. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I run my thumb over the scratches in its casing and tell myself the line on the tiny screen is just a line, nothing more. On the worst nights when the wind drums and a very slow weight crosses my roof, I lie flat and hold my breath until the house remembers it is only a house and lets the sound pass by. I was 27 and 6 months into my posting with the Forest Service when they sent me out alone. After the divorce, the quiet had become the only thing that made sense. So when the assignment landed on my desk, trail assessment on the northeast shoulder of Mount Adams, Cinder Gulch Loop, early June 2021, I signed for the keys without thinking twice. My supervisor, a tired, sun-creased man named Hal Morales, walked me to the bay. He'd done 3 decades in these woods and had that ranger habit of joking with you, while his eyes measured weather, gear, and your face. Storm chew out in winter knocked a lot of debris, he said, then lowered his voice as if there were someone else in the garage. We've taken a few calls. Folks say they've heard things, likely elk echoing off the walls. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ping me every half hour. The drive from the district office took a little under 3 hours. The last stretch narrowed to a single lane that wound through fir and hemlock dark as a tunnel. My government truck was the only vehicle at the gated turnout. I signed the log at 07:12, logged the weather, low 50s, overcast building from the west, and started in with a radio check. Standard stuff. Erosion notes, blowdowns I could clear with a handsaw, a photo here and there for the maintenance plan. I wrote everything in the field book because that's what you do when you're alone. You make a clock out of ink. 2 miles were easy. The trail paralleled a cold, fast creek that tossed glacial grit against basalt. Then the canyon tightened. The canopy pressed low enough to steal the warmth from my breath. The light changed to that drowned green you only get under old growth, and the air smelled like wet rock and crushed nettle. Just past a mile marker nailed to a cedar, I hit the first real damage. The tread had been torn apart. If you've seen slide debris, you learn the look. Flow downhill, fans out, predictable. This wasn't that. Cobble, root balls, and limbs were scattered upslope as though hurled back toward the switchback. I squatted in the mess with my tape and camera, working out how we'd recut the bench, and keyed the radio. District, Vega. Trail section at Cinder Gulch, mile 3 looks like a slide, but distribution is odd. I gave the coordinates, held the mic, and waited for Hal's usual copy. Instead, I heard my name spoken from somewhere out in the trees. Not ranger, not hey, not help. My first name, Rowan, long and slow. The way your aunt says it when you come in late. I stood there with the radio pressed to my cheek and counted 10 breaths. The sound didn't repeat. Hal came back on the line asking for description and whether I wanted a partner dispatched. I said I'd proceed with caution, update at 45. I told myself it was a hunter, a trespasser throwing their voice. Kids screwing around. I moved on. The canyon walls climbed. Salmonberry crowded the corridor. Devil's Club scraped my pants. The creek dropped out of sight and became a noise. Every 100 yards, I hit a yellow flag in the duff and punched a waypoint on the handheld GPS. Because that's what training drills into you. Leave breadcrumbs you can trust when the forest is loud. The calling started again near 0930. It wasn't louder. It was clearer. Like it had found the notch where the canyon carried sound neat as a wire. My name came from the slope above me, then down low near the water. then right behind me, close enough that I turned and lifted my saw like it was going to help. Every time I tried to locate it, the echo turned the world around and handed my ears the wrong direction. "Rowan," it said, gentle and patient. "Rowan." I kept moving. The trail spit me into a small opening where the trees stood back in a ragged ring, 60 feet across maybe. The place had the feel of an amphitheater. Every trunk circling that clearing carried fresh wounds. 4 deep gouges raked down from a height I couldn't reach, sticky sap stringing like amber glass. I counted 22 trees, 22 sets of the same marks, each 4 stripes 2 inches apart, starting 8 feet up and ending around 15. The chips on the ground were still wet. Something had worked its way around the edge deliberately, tree to tree, like a person checking doors. I lifted the camera for documentation, and that's when I noticed cloth caught high in a hemlock's limbs, tan and dull green. Not rags, not party streamers, torn sleeves and strips of pant leg, service colors sun-washed. They hung like someone had thrown them up there and missed. I have seen wind tear tents and shred tarps. This wasn't that. This looked placed. The voices stopped the second I stepped into that ring. The quiet swelled until I felt it push in my ears. Even the creek seemed to pull back its noise. I want to be exact here because the next part is where my brain keeps wanting to backspace and rewrite. Every tree around me leaned. Not a sway, a bend toward the center like a group of people nodding, one after the other around the circle. North first, then the next, then the next. A slow wave of wood tip, 10 degrees maybe. Not enough to break anything, but enough to show intent. The last fir eased down and up again. And with that, the talking resumed all at once. It wasn't just my name now. It was a conversation, a handful of voices overlapping. The way people chat around a table when nobody cares who has the floor. They kept saying Rowan and then added numbers. My employee ID, my radio call sign, the address on my personnel file. They laughed softly about my marriage counseling notes. They said I was wearing a red shell I don't own anymore, and scuffed boots I'd tossed 6 months ago. One of them described my wedding band as if it was still on my hand. My radio snapped and whined. Hal asked for my 30-minute status. I pressed the button, and before I could speak, my voice filled the speaker. The words I'd used at 07:12. When I checked in at the gate, same cadence, same breath, as if someone had recorded me and was hitting play. I squeezed transmit again. Same clip. Tried channel 1. Channel 5, popped the battery, reseated it, reset the unit. Each time it played me back. The tree voices grew louder while my voice spilled from the radio. Not in decibels, in head count. More of them. Another added in from just behind me, talking about things that hadn't happened. She's going to slip on wet basalt, one said. She's going to find metal in the tread. She'll run and tear her sleeve. They named outcomes in a tone you use when you read a forecast and the day obeys. I left. There wasn't a decision. My body turned and my legs did what they're built to do. On paper, the route back was simple. I had waypoints set. I'd tied orange flagging at the last junction. My phone sat off in my breast pocket for emergencies. I just needed to retrace my own steps. I reached for the first ribbon and found a ribbon all right. Hot. Pink survey tape with hazard and a date scribbled in black. Marker, 1993. Another fluttered on a vine maple with a date from 2007. Another, 1987 all. Said the same thing under the date in the same blocky printing. Rowan Vega found location. The gouges on the ring trees were still there, but when I glanced back, the sap had skinned over and gone dull. The way wounds look in August. The shredded sleeves were gone, and in their place a strand of flagging caught on a twig read 2001. My GPS map still showed me at the clearing's coordinates, but the unit's clock skipped from 1412 to 1998 to 0743 to March, and back to June so fast the numbers blurred. I ran, brush-whipped my shins. Devil's club punched through my pants. Roots rose where there hadn't been roots. Slopes tilted wrong for a few steps, then tilted back, like the ground couldn't decide what the map wanted. Footfalls matched mine 1/2 beat out of phase, so it sounded like I had a second body welded to my shadow. The voices stopped calling my name and changed to office talk about me. Vega disoriented for 72 hours. One said in Hal's voice, except it wasn't something he'd ever said. Filed temporal event memo. said another, reading in that clipped way supervisors type. Requested transfer to Deschutes 2 months later. A softer voice, I couldn't place it. Listed trainings I hadn't taken yet. They quoted a psychological eval in detail I wish they hadn't. Time cracked. My watch told me 12 minutes had passed since the clearing. My lungs said an hour. I barged onto a stretch of trail so tidy it could have been printed. Fresh gravel, clean water bars, edges clipped. I didn't know it. It shouldn't have been there. I study trail maps for fun. I sleep with them under my pillow. This path didn't live on any of mine. Still, downhill is downhill. I took it. The brown posts at the intersections were new and square and smelled like stain. The plates bolted to them were dated 1980 and warned hikers about recurring sound phenomena and localized time drift zones. I've read 50 years of Forest Service manuals. Those phrases don't live in any of them. My radio died quietly, not static, not battery chirp. The screen just chose to be a mirror. I cracked my phone to check the time and found 17 missed calls from Hal, each stamped tomorrow's date. The last quarter mile, you could have told me it was half a day, was the worst. The parking lot was visible between trees right where I'd left it. The rectangle of asphalt sloped and hot, but the space between the trunks kept adding itself. Gullies appeared where I didn't remember gullies. Little rivulets had cut their own lines where the map said they shouldn't. Trucks blinked into existence and back out. Green service rigs from the 80s with logos I'd only seen in historic photos. My current district's white pickups. A tan SUV with a wood panel stripe that made my teeth hurt to look at. For 3 seconds, I swear I saw a wagon drawn by 2 dun horses slide through the lot and vanish. The voices multiplied into a crowd until it felt like standing at the edge of a football field, while every seat murmured my name. They disagreed about me. One group calmly insisted I'd retired last fall. Another recited a transfer to Alaska I never filed. A few said my ex and I were talking again. One little cluster whispered that I didn't exist at all. A woman, she sounded like my mother the way she spoke when I came home in the dark in high school, said, "Rowan, honey, don't answer." And then that voice broke like a record warped in a hot car. I stepped into the lot and nearly fell because the asphalt rippled like heat over a stove. My truck sat where I'd left it, but the plate wouldn't decide what numbers belonged to it. The digits flowed and rewrote themselves faster than I could blink, every possible arrangement flickering past. I yanked the door, climbed in, turned the key. The engine made the familiar grumble, and a second note underneath, like a recording of my truck was playing a fraction of a second late. I drove. The access road ran itself out in the right shape but the wrong order. Curves came early, then late. Landmarks took 1 step to the left. The radio, which I never listened to, cycled its own stations without my hand. News from a winter storm in 1996. A forecast for next Friday's fire danger. An old PS Public Service announcement about an unusual acoustic event study, with a phone number that rang busy. When the district office showed up in the right place at last, it was late afternoon if you believed the light and noon if you believed the clock on the dash. Hal was already outside. He started toward me fast, stopped like he'd run into glass, and keyed his shoulder mic without taking his eyes off me. "Copy," he said. "She's here. She's back." His voice sounded like both relief and a man trying to keep his mouth shut. I killed the engine and walked toward him, dust stuck to my sweaty face. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He told me I'd been missing 3 days. Search and rescue had found my truck once with all my gear laid out in the dirt, as if someone had cataloged it. Each thing dusted in gray ash like the mountain had sneezed a century back. The radio at the trailhead had broadcast my voice on a loop every hour for a day and a half, saying, "I hear someone calling me from the trees. They know my name." After that, there's a stack of paperwork that doesn't help anyone sleep. There's an incident narrative that coughs and clears its throat around anything weird. There's an instruction not to return to Cinder Gulch alone. There's a meeting where someone from outside the district sits in a corner and doesn't introduce himself and writes nothing, even though he's clearly taking notes somewhere else with his eyes. I took 2 weeks. Then I took a transfer to a lower, drier district where the horizon lets you draw straight lines. I told my friends I wanted more sun. That is also true. The larger truth is that there are things I will not do now. I won't Answer if a forest speaks in my voice, I won't. Step into a circle the woods have prepared. For me, I will leave when the silence feels like someone thinking. Sometimes I wake at 03:11 with my radio on the nightstand muttering static. I don't own that radio anymore. I turned it in on my last day. The noise fades when I sit up, and the house goes back to being a house. Other times my phone buzzes and shows a missed call from tomorrow with Hal's name. And when I pick it up, the log is clean, like it never happened. I've stopped asking the phone for proof. If you go up toward Adams and step into a canyon where the air turns old and green, you'll find trail signs set by careful hands, and you'll see bark wounds a bear could have made if a bear could count to 4. You might hear your nickname the way only a handful of people use it. If you do, don't argue with your legs. They're smarter than the part of your brain that needs an explanation. I still keep my field book in a desk drawer. The last lines from that day lean hard to the right because I wrote them fast. The ink bled where rain hit the page. I put my watch on top of the notebook sometimes and try to make them agree. They don't. When the wind comes up and the cedar in the yard leans, I lie there and listen to see whether its branches bend like wood or like a row of heads looking down at one person in the middle, waiting to hear what she decides to do next. I was 28 that fall, a junior tech on a forest survey crew, and they sent me out to finish a mapping pass on old cut lines near Coldwater Ridge, east side of Mount Adams. Our GPS base unit kept dropping locks, so my partner, Theo, hiked back to the truck to swap batteries while I wrapped one last sector before dusk. I liked the quiet. No road noise, no bars on my phone. Just wet duff under my boots and that sharp smell you get after rain when the pines are dripping. The cabin showed itself the way a memory does. There, and then more there the longer you look. I was skirting a row of old cedars when I caught a line that wasn't tree or rock. A roof edge dark with moss. No posted sign, no recent trail. Just a narrow seam through salal and huckleberry where feet had once passed. I pushed through, branches wet enough to stripe my sleeves, and stepped into a small clearing with a single structure tucked tight to the slope. It looked like a logger's bunkhouse from some old photo. 12 by 16 hand-hewn logs gone almost black. A little window with wavy glass. Ivy and moss had taken most of the roof, but the corners were square, and the door hung true. The odd part was the hardware. Hinges that didn't match the age, bright under the rusted padlock like someone had replaced them and then left. I wiped the window with my cuff and felt my stomach go strange. Inside, a metal lantern hooked to a beam, a dented thermos on the table, a jacket folded across a chair back. Dust, yes, but not the kind that drifts in through holes and scatters. This dust lay even, like the room had been closed tight for years. I tried the door. The lock was fussy, but it gave with a little twist of my knife blade. The air inside was cold and layered. Tobacco, oil, old wool, damp wood. I set my headlamp to low and made a slow circle. Pegs on the wall still held a slicker and a cap. The table had a stack of paper, rubber-banded, each page ruled in pencil. Crew names, chokers pulled, line numbers, dates from the early 80s. Clean, careful handwriting. There was a ledger started and never finished, the last line trailing mid-word. I took pictures, table, lantern jacket, the ledger with a scale card for reference. I called Theo on the handheld, static. He was probably already at the truck and out of range. I marked coordinates twice in my notebook, because some part of me already worried I'd misplaced this place. When I turned to go, I saw the prints by the door. Boot soles clear as stamps in the damp grit, deeper on the toe like whoever made them, had stepped in from wet ground and paused. The stride was longer than mine. I looked down at my own boots just to be sure. The treads didn't match. I pulled the door shut, slid the lock, and hissed when the metal touched my palm. It was colder than the air should have allowed. I told myself that was nothing. I told myself a lot of things on the walk out. Back at the motel, I dumped the SD card onto my laptop and typed a quick summary for our supervisor. On a larger screen, the room looked too clear, like the light had reached farther than my lamp could have managed. I zoomed the window picture and stopped. There, faint in the glass, was a smear that could have been glare, or a cheek and an eye, wide and flat the way faces go in old panes. I closed the file, told myself it was me, Theo read my notes and joked I'd found a hermit's clubhouse. The unit's record said that section had been inactive since 1983. No one had a permit within 10 miles. We decided to take a ranger with us in the morning so no one could accuse us of trespass or drama. We went back at first light with 2 officers, Keefe and Ramos, and a local historian named Dahl. I walked them straight in. Same cedars, same slope, same little seam of a path through brush. The clearing opened like a held breath, and I stopped because there was nothing there. No cabin. No foundation stones. No trash or tin or broken glass. Just a rectangle of darker soil where something had kept sun off for years. And raw dirt like a shovel had turned it yesterday, even though no one had. O'Keefe scraped the ground and shook his head. Ramos circled outward, looking for drag trails or ATV tracks. Dahl stood quiet with his hands in his coat, and then said softly that loggers used to tell stories about a shack that walked. He said a line was shut down out here after a bad accident, and a crew that wintered over never came out. He said people heard a door shut sometimes when the fog pooled low. We spread out. Theo's boot heel scuffed a little ash under the topsoil, gray and powder fine. Cold as if it belonged to last night, not 40 years ago. I felt pressure in my ears like descending in a plane. The forest went bare of sound all at once. Not a bird, not a fly. Only the small fingers of wind combing needles somewhere high. Then it eased, and we all took a breath like we'd been holding one together without knowing. We stayed long enough to feel foolish. We left with nothing but my pictures and coordinates. At the ranger station, I pulled the photo set again to show them I wasn't making it up. The cabin sat right where I'd put it on the screen. Lantern, thermos, jacket, ledger. I opened my folder to hand Dahl the stack of shift logs. The folder was empty. I hadn't put the paper in a side pocket. I hadn't moved it to my pack. It was simply not there. That night at the motel, 2 light knocks came at my door around 2. Not insistent. Tap, tap. A sound with manners. The hallway was empty when I opened up. On the carpet by my boot, a folded scrap of yellow paper. Inside, a message in blunt pencil. You shouldn't have taken anything. I didn't sleep. I drove home before dawn and said nothing to Theo. Over the next few days, the weirdness came in small doses. My field GPS woke to the cabin's coordinates no matter what lot I stood in. My jacket held a smell I couldn't wash out. Wet moss and tobacco. A hint of hot metal. I vacuumed my apartment and found a ribbon of gritty dirt on the bedroom floor that looked like boot soles had walked from the door to the far corner and back. The pattern didn't match my tread. I filed my report and asked for a transfer closer to scrub and sun. My supervisor didn't argue. He didn't say I was spooked. He didn't say he understood. He signed, slid my copy over, and told me to take a week. Curiosity still bit at me, so a month later, I pulled satellite tiles for the spot. The clearing showed as an ordinary patch of shade, except for a faint, stubborn rectangle that didn't belong to tree shadow. Each time I zoomed, the image fuzzed, stuttered, and then clicked back a step like a finger had tapped undo. I haven't gone back. I take a longer route to avoid that road. When I pass a stand of pine, sometimes I catch the same layered smell, sap, cold smoke, the tang of oil, and wonder what sits with its door shut, patient as weather, waiting for another set of feet. A few nights ago, I woke because the room felt wrong, too crowded with quiet. My clock said 2:03. I listened and heard nothing, which can be its own kind of sound. Then, very softly, wood moved the way wood moves when weight shifts on it. Floorboard sound, not apartment sound. Cabin sound. It came from nowhere, it should have. And stopped before I could decide whether to get up. In the morning, my GPS blinked on by itself and showed a point I knew by heart. The unit beeped once like a polite reminder, and let the screen go dark. I put it in a drawer with the yellow paper and the field book from that day. Some things I keep not to use, but to prove to myself I didn't dream them. If you ask me what I believe, I'll tell you this. Some places remember themselves so hard, they make room for anyone who steps into the memory. If you find one, don't take anything that belongs to it. Don't even take a breath you don't need. Close the door behind you. And if later something knocks with manners, let it. Not every answer wants your hand on the latch.